Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cherry the Geek TV. I'm Joe Vanourney. Saturday Night Live just celebrated its 50th anniversary with a primetime anniversary special. Our guest today was a cast member on Saturday Night Live from 1982 to 1985. That's seasons 8, 9, and 10.
Wow.
He was at the 50th anniversary special. We're going to talk to him about that. We're going to talk to him about his time on the show. It's Gary Kroeger. Gary, welcome to Cherry the Geek TV.
I'll bet everybody was hoping to hear Eddie Murphy. It's Billy Crystal. It's Marty Short. It's Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Yes, 82 to 85, but I never remember that's season 8, 9, and 10. And that's what it is, right?
Yes, 8, 9, and 10.
Well, here's what's funny, Joe. I think of myself still as the new era of Saturday Night Live, right? I still think of myself as part of the new um, generation after the original. But I did the show 40 years ago. The show's 50 years old, meaning, simple math, I was there until the 10th anniversary of the show. That's the early days. I'm like a fossil.
Well, they
But
always say the people that watch Saturday Night Live, the cast, the people that were the cast when you first discover the show, that's your cast, right?
yeah.
And I think there's truth to that because I was in junior high at the time. I was familiar with Saturday Night Live. I knew, I think I'd seen clips, switching the channels here and there when I was a kid, and I of course knew, that Caddyshack and uh and Foul Play and Oh
Yeah,
Heavenly
yeah.
Dog and
Yeah,
Blues
right,
Brothers, all these
right.
movies that these people from Saturday Night Live were coming. But I can vividly remember the episode of Saturday Night Live where I discovered it was the buckwheat's been shot. The buckwheat's been shot. I fell in love with the show at that point, and from then on, it was a weekly staple as a junior high kid and a high school kid and beyond. And you were part of that cast, so you're my cast. So it's
Well,
awesome.
it's funny how many times I heard that the weekend of the 50th, including Keegan-Michael Key. And I concluded just what you just said. The cast, your cast is the cast that is on TV when you're 11 years old, basically.
Mhm.
The show, when you discover Saturday Night Live as an 11 to 14-year-old, that's your cast. Because, yeah, you and Keegan were saying um, that's the show that I would sneak out late at night and watch that I wasn't supposed to. And it was Eddie Murphy, and you were there. He mentioned Ira Needleman that I did, and another sketch with Christopher Reeve called Superman. Um, and those were pivotal, he said, to him. And that really blew my mind because I admire him so much, and he's got to be about 50 years old. So it's it's when you were really, really young.
And as a kid, as a teenager watching the show, I I don't know if you as cast members realize this, and I don't know if it's the same for adults that are watching. I'm sure it's not, but for kids, you and Robin Duke and Tim Kazurinsky, people like that, were equally as important to us as Eddie Murphy. The quote unquote the stars of the show. To me, watching, and I'm sure, and people my age, you, Rich Hall, people like that, equal to Billy Crystal, equal to Marty Short. So I don't know if you guys felt that at the time.
No, I never did. I'm discovering it now, really in the last few years, or really sort of since the 40th. So for the last 10 years, I've been hearing that and experiencing it because I really personally felt sort of lost in the whole thing. I knew that I was there. I knew that I occasionally did something good. And going back to that Buckwheat is Assassinated, I think one of the best satirical pieces the show in 50 years has ever done because it really was a satire of the saturation of news and creating stories. And it it mushroomed into so many other different sketches. I was a buckwheat impersonator, and the David Susskind, moderated it, and Eddie Murphy as was a buckwheat impersonator as well, so a bit surreal. Um, But we were doing good stuff, and I knew that, and I was happy to be part of it. But, I didn't walk down the street and get recognized because it wasn't 11-year-olds walking down the street, was it? It's 21, 22, 31. And I wasn't their star. I wasn't their Eddie Murphy. I wasn't their, Phil Hartman. But so in a sense, I sort of put the show away. Thought, okay, it was my stepping stone. I got an agent. It got me to LA. I began a 20-year career, but I have to revisit Saturday Night Live in my head to realize, oh, yeah, I was part of that.
Let's talk about before Saturday Night Live. Where were you? What was your training? Were you trying to break into comedy? Were you a theater kid? What was kind of your background, and what led to that audition for Saturday Night Live?
It's a great question, and not because the answer is going to be about me, but for anybody listening that is looking for a career in a very difficult business. The percentage of people who actually make a living are about 1%, and only 10% don't wait tables, basically. I was a theater kid all through high school, and I went to Northwestern University to study theater, but I very quickly did not like the institution of theater. I didn't like the curriculum in terms of how structured it was. Now, it's probably a good thing, and great actors came out of Northwestern because of the structure, but it didn't work for me. So I very quickly fell into a group of renegade people: Paul Barras, Rush Pearson, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Brad Hall, and a host of others. And we started doing comedy around Chicago and around Northwestern. Um, I always call it guerrilla theater, and I think the others would probably say stop using that term. But it was sort of guerrilla theater. We were sort of renegade. Any place we could put on a show, we would put on a show, and it was a combination of writing and improvisation. And I did that for a number of years with them. By 1982, after a few years of this, I think Brad Hall had the brilliant idea, coincidentally, to do a review called the Golden 50th Anniversary Jubilee. And basically, it was to take every two sketches from each show that we did that were actually good. Because let's face it, comedy is like a batting average in the Hall of Fame: 300. 3 out of 10 are good, seven suck. Seven are strikeouts. So we took those two or three sketches that were good and put them into one show and opened it up next door to Second City in Chicago. Well, Second City always has a spillover crowd, so they'd come to see us. We got good reviews, and suddenly we were sort of the toast of Chicago. Dick Ebersol, Bob Tischler came to see us. We didn't know. We had no idea they were in the audience, and said, hey, can you be at our hotel tomorrow? This is September of 82. We said, okay. They said, can you be in New York in 2 weeks? We'd like you to be the new cast of Saturday Night Live. Now, Brad Hall, being the guy that he is, had started this theater, and he went, I'm going to have to think about that. He wasn't sure he wanted to do it. And Julia and I think Paul was with Brad too, but Julia and I were like, come on, we're going to do this. Um, the exhilaration of that, because I knew the show from the beginning, from 1975, from the beginning, was the best part of the whole experience. Driving down Lakeshore Drive with Julia Louis-Dreyfus before she was Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and screaming like school kids, like we'd won the lottery, that in a week we're going to be on television. Um, that's hard to equal. I'll never forget how that felt.
So let's give people a little history that maybe aren't familiar with those early days. Lorne Michaels and the original cast left after season 5. Season 6, new producer took over, Gene Dumanian. They did 12 episodes. They were eviscerated by the press. They were eviscerated by fans. People screaming,
The ratings were down.
screaming expletives to them out the street. You guys suck. Uh, and to be fair, they had challenges that season.
It was impossible to do what they were asked to do. To follow the original cast was impossible. I don't think anybody's to blame. I don't think Jean Dumanian's to blame. She probably wasn't the right person, but she knew the show, and I think the cast was terrific.
Yeah, they had Gilbert Gottfried and
yes, of course, there was
Carl
no
Rock.
way Yeah, Charlie Rocket. There was no way they were going to succeed in the public perception and the critical perception.
So after that season, Dick Ebersol, the Gene Domanian gets fired. Dick Ebersol says, who was part of late night.
He was the network executive that greenlit and really worked close with Lorne Michaels. I don't think Dick gets enough credit for the beginning of Saturday Night Live that he deserves. But you're right. Then he came in to take over.
And all of the cast is let go except for a young kid named Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo,
Correct.
who they saw like these guys, whatever these guys are doing, they've got something. We're gonna hang on to them. Brought in a new cast. That next year, season seven, also a little bit of a struggle, better than season six. Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo were becoming bigger stars, but the show still wasn't quite clicking. So you guys come in the next year. You, Brad Hall, Julie Louis-Dreyfus, Mary
Paul
Gross,
Ross is a writer.
and
Mary was there the year before.
oh, Mary was there before.
Just to make it clear, the cast the year before was Eddie, Joe, Robin was brought in, Mary was brought in, Tim was brought in, and Christine Ebersol. No relation to Dick, but from Broadway,
And
Christine.
Tony Rosato.
And Tony Rosato. Or was Tony? I get confused with Tony, and may he rest in peace. Wonderful guy, by the way. Um, was he with the show the year before?
I think he was. I think he was part of season seven, so he was
Okay,
there.
all right. I'll give you that. But that's a good cast, a really good cast, a versatile cast. When we got to Saturday Night Live, Dick said to us, "We hired you guys because you reminded us of the guerrilla renegades that the original cast was, a new kind of physical energy." And quite frankly, Eddie's already getting somewhat apathetic. He's got a movie career that's about to start. 48 Hours was about to come out, and they were afraid that he was losing interest, and they wanted to light a fire. So Dick proceeded to show us the stuff from the previous year in his office. And I remember thinking, why were we hired? Christine Ebersol. They're great. These people are great. I mean, I thought it was as strong as all get out, this cast. Um, so we were sort of confused as to why we were there. Dick said it was to light a fire, but apparently the fire was lit because Eddie supernovaed right after that. So we were very quickly relegated, and it sounds like I'm poor me, but we were very quickly relegated to table scraps. It was going to be the Eddie and Joe show, and Tim, being as strong as he is and able to write so quickly, cornered the market on the news and specific kinds of films and Tim-centric sketches. But the rest of us really didn't fight, struggled to get airtime in season 8.
So was there any intimidation that you guys felt going into that, knowing that those two casts before you in 1980 and then 1981
So,
were talented, they were doing well,
yes,
but yet the people on the street weren't having any of it.
right.
Like what was that like going into that? You're excited,
Well,
you're joining the cast, it's an instant, it's
yeah,
becoming an institution, but at the same
again,
time, like what are
I
we getting into?
I don't ever want to sound like sour grapes or anything like that, but I have to tell the truth. It was dismal. It was a nightmare because here's what happened. First of all, the people who were let go were friends of the people who were there. We were complete unknowns. So they're literally going, who the hell are these people? And Dick and Bob asked us to do our stage show on a Wednesday afternoon in front of the cast, the crew, and the writers in a room where they still do the read through with, furniture, showroom lights, and everybody was had lunch, and so the sugar level was all askew. People were tired, and we do this physical comedy, surreal stage show that bombed, bombed. Not a laugh, maybe a smile. Mostly people felt sorry for us. But that's how we started. So it didn't inspire writers to want to write for us because they like, oh my God, they'll be gone, in 13 weeks. Eddie Murphy came up to me and he could see that it was pretty deflating. Kroeger, You're the whitest man in America. And he imitated my hard consonant Midwestern dialect perfectly. But it was his way of saying, hey, it's all right, kid. It's all right. I see you. I have eyes on you. You'll survive. But that was our christening.
So the show started clicking. Uh, those first two those season, those 82 season, 83 season that you're on. Uh, but then the next year, the 10th season, uh, Dick Ebersol, the show's still not doing well in the ratings. Dick Ebersol says, I'm going to bring in some heavy hitters. I'm going to sign Billy Crystal. I'm going to bring in Marty Short. I'm going to bring in Christopher Guest, who had just been in This Is Spinal Tap. We're bringing in Rich Hall from not necessarily the news on HBO. And we're going to do this season with these seasoned professionals, you and Julia and
And
Jim
Mary.
Belushi uh,
Jim and Mary. Yeah.
and Mary move on. But you lose Brad Hall, you lose Tim Kazurinsky out.
Yeah.
What's it like as a cast member to lose that now that you're losing your friends?
It was
These
hard.
people, Brad Hall came with you. He was your friend.
When
Uh,
he,
losing him, losing Tim, but at the same time saying, "Oh, well, we get to continue to do it another year."
well, that's exactly right. It's everything's a dichotomous experience because on one hand, it's like, wait a second, Brad's my rock. He's Julia's rock. Um, and he's gone. Tim was everybody's rock, and he's gone. Robin was just a delightful and talented human being, gone. And they had all become friends. Um, but at the same time, to make the cut and then get to work with those guys, I couldn't say that that wasn't exhilarating because it was. What had happened was Eddie was done with the show. He was done after the 2 seasons I was there with him. He wasn't going to do the show. And without Eddie, Dick felt like I don't have a show. And he wasn't going to make it the Joe Piscopo show. And, I don't know what the politics were concerning Joe, but with Eddie gone, Dick felt we're in bad shape here. So I called him the George Steinbrenner of comedy. He hires the big bats. He pays the money that he has to get his show on the air. So I couldn't argue with any of the people that he brought in, Billy, Marty, Chris, Harry Shearer, difficult as he may be, a genius. Rich Hall, delightful guy. Pam Stephenson, underused but extremely talented. So I could see the logic of why he did that. And I was thrilled to have made the cut. I think he kept us simply so that there's some recognizable foundational base to the show because the audience does like to care. They don't like do-overs, and that's been proven. That was proven from the season Lorne left to Gene Domanian. The audience doesn't like a complete do-over. And so he kept us, and I felt that the show found its legs. I felt that I started to find my legs that year, but then it was suddenly over.
So that season, and I'll die on this hill. That season is the best season of Saturday Night Live in the 50-year history. I would put it up there.
I put up the top five anyway,
Yeah.
you
So
know.
what was it like having that experience, not knowing that that was going to be the end, your final season? Just walk me through that season as a whole. Like creatively, I think they were hitting home runs.
I
Uh,
felt that previously the show was batting 300. I think it was batting 500 then. Again, I and maybe even better. I agree with you that I think that's one of that belongs in the pantheon of SNL. Um, the lion's share of work was always going to be covered by Chris, Marty, and Billy. And that's a lot of work. That's a lot of showtime right there. So I made myself available. I said, guys, I can be your utility infielder, anything that you need. And they used me that way. I never imitated Alan Alda before, but Billy came up to me and said, I'm doing the Joe Franklin show. I want an Alan Alda impersonator. And I said, give me a half hour. And by the end of the half hour, I was doing a pretty good Alan Alda. The blood on Klinger's apron is clashing with his paisley dress. And that thrilled them. Chris Guest said, can you do um, I don't even remember who he said, but they would ask me if I could do these characters, and I said, "Give me a few minutes, and I'll figure it out." So they liked me,
So the
and no, yeah, they liked me, and that was really really fun, and I got to observe these prolific, fluid masters of comedy. So I was excited about the possibility of another year, and like I said, it was over.
when in the process of that year did you even though the show was creatively a 10, the ratings, I believe, that season still weren't very high, and the show was in danger of getting canceled, if I understand the story correctly.
You may understand the story better than I do. I never thought, all I knew is that I had a job the next week, the next week, the next week. Numbers would be talked about. Hey, this was a good show, whatever. I don't think that I was ever aware of ratings danger.
So it when the season finale aired that May, did you have any idea that that was the end, or
I only
everybody
heard,
was going to be gone?
no, I only heard after it was over that all of them had signed 1 year contracts. I didn't know that. I really didn't. I was making plans in my head, and I had a good year. I think that I knew that maybe Billy would move on or something like that because he's getting all these film roles from Rob Reiner. Um, but I really thought it would keep going, and I said, no, Kroger, Dick Ebersol's decided to leave because Marty's leaving. Chris only wanted to do it a year. Billy's only doing it a year, and it was over. From what I understand, Dick Ebersol was going to produce Saturday night fights. He's going to have boxing, wrestling, or whatever. Saturday night main event. I don't know what it'd be called, but that was going. There was talk of the Joe Piscopo hour, things like that. But then Lorne was coaxed to coming back. I guess he didn't like to see his show in other people's hands. I think he saw that the show was getting good, and I don't think he liked that. And I really can't think for Lorne or speak for him, but he was brought back and continued on with a new cast, almost as if those 5 years never happened.
So, looking back at your 3 years that you worked on the show, do you have a favorite host, favorite musical guest?
Yeah, yeah. My favorite host was Howard Hessman because he did the show twice. Dr. Johnny Fever from K WKRP. Um, because he could improvise. And I wrote a couple of sketches that got on the air, and he and I both committed to script without cue cards. And so the performances of them I'm particularly proud of. And he was just such a genuinely kind and giving guy. And as a true improv performer, he didn't hog focus. He knew that strength came from balance. And it was really a performance. And so I really loved having him on the show. Two musical performers blew my mind. The first was, I think my first show was Queen. That's really all I need to say. Queen, Queen. That's almost in my world like saying the Beatles. There's the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and Queen. Queen does the show, and Freddie Mercury has laryngitis. Laryngitis. There's talk of them having to cancel. Well, he went out and sang with laryngitis. God forbid, if that's laryngitis, go listen to it on YouTube. I mean, Freddie Mercury with laryngitis is still the best singer in rock music, or was. So that was exciting to be standing right there. And then I have to tell you, Stevie Wonder on the show was exciting. And it wasn't so much the performance on air. Brad Hall and I love to watch the musical acts rehearse on Thursday and get their lighting cues and their sound cues and things like that. So we went in to watch Stevie rehearse, and he's just playing the piano up on the center stage. And he said, "Could somebody roll a tape recorder? I got a song in my head." So we watched him put a song down. I couldn't tell you what it was. It might have been, "Da, da, da, to say I love you," but it was something that went on to become a Stevie Wonder song. And we watched him transpose it from his brain right then and there. And I thought, I am so lucky to just be this close to genius, legends, the people who inspire all of us to go into this. to be that close to it, I still, you can tell, I still get excited about that.
Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, and I believe I know the answer to this question already because
Who was my least favorite
your
host?
least favorite. You've written about this before. Who is your least favorite host? And we can talk about him because he's dead, and there's no more danger of
Well,
getting
now
allegedly killed by him.
there's there it's more complicated an answer than you think because he wasn't my least favorite host, but I'll tell the story in a second. And we're talking about Robert Blake. I was not enamored with Sid Caesar, not because he wasn't great, not because I didn't admire him, but he didn't understand the show. And so he was not a generous performer. And the same I would say with Jerry Lewis. Now, Joe Piscopo, if he heard me say that, it would slap me in the face right now, and so would Eddie Murphy. But it wasn't a generous show. And so I didn't enjoy them. But Robert Blake, here's the story with Robert Blake. And I didn't actually divulge this. Writers in the room have since said this is what he did. It's what he did. On Monday, you everybody meets in the producer's office, so Dick Ebersol's office, the whole cast and the writers, and they meet the host, 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something. And you pitch them a few ideas that maybe you're ballparking in your head. And I had this script, and I don't remember what it was, but I think it was called The Breezy Philosopher, and it was really Beretta, and all of the intelligence was coming from the cockatoo. You know, the cockatoo was quoting Shakespeare and whatever. It was kind of cerebral, but it made use of Robert Blake, and it was funny. And he takes the script, and he, what words can or cannot use
Yeah,
on your
whatever.
program?
You can use the words he used.
He wipes his ass with it, with my script, and throws it at me and hits me in the face. Now, everybody was in shock, except me. I really honestly thought, well, I guess I'm in show business now. I guess that's what a star does when they don't like your idea. I really wasn't hurt. I thought, wow, okay, I guess I'll think of something else. But others saw that as like, poor young kid who comes in here, he pitches an idea, the host essentially defecates on it and throws it in his face, which is pretty horrible when you think about it. There's no nice way to tell that story. But on the floor and in the sketches, he was committed. He was fine. But I think because of that, others went, I will not work with him again. He will not do this show. Now, I got to know him after the fact, years later in Los Angeles. I reminded him of that. He had no recollection of it at all.
I'm going to jump off topic just for a second related to this because you've also talked about this publicly. This is a fun fact. You were there at Vitello's restaurant in Studio City the night that Bonnie Lee Bakley, Robert Blake's wife, I don't know, wife, girlfriend,
Wife,
was
I think,
murdered.
yes, wife was murdered. Yep.
You were
Yep.
there in the restaurant. Robert Blake
Mhm.
comes into the restaurant back. They leave. He comes back and says, "Oh, I forgot my gun. I left
Right.
my gun. I couldn't have killed her. I had left my gun here in the restaurant." Well, talk this briefly.
Well,
That story.
that's the story. I did get to know him, and but we were never friendly. But he had a booth that he liked in Vitello's, and I was seated in the booth next to him. Hey, Robert, and I didn't really know Bonnie, but he introduced me, and I ate my meal, and I saw them leave. Oh, 5, 6, 7 minutes later, he comes back in, and he said, "I forgot my gun. My memory says it was in a little paper bag or something in the booth." And then he leaves. Okay. Weird. Who forgets their gun? Who brings their gun to Vitello's? Whatever. I walked home right by what I saw on the news the next day, the car. So I may have walked by a body, or I might have walked by it right before it happened or something. I don't know. I did go to the police and say, well, I can verify this, that, and the other. No one was ever really interested in my story. I mean, they had it from so many other people already, I guess. I expected, hey, if I need to be a witness, I walked by. I didn't hear any gunshots at 10:15 or whatever, but nobody ever. I
Crazy,
was not subpoenaed.
crazy story. We're almost out of time, but I don't want to let you go without talking about this 50th anniversary.
Yes.
There was a whole weekend this time. Friday night there was a concert. Sunday night, they had a 3.5 hour extravaganza. Talk about your experiences. Let's start with the concert.
Oh, it's so hard to put my finger on it. Look, I know when I go, I'm not going to be part of it. I'm not even in the business for the last 20 years. I know that going in, but I go to see Brad, I go to see Tim. This time I got to see Robin Duke, and this time I got to spend time with Julia. I go for David Sheffield, a writer, and I go to see people that I love, that I never get to see. And at the first party, I walk down the red carpet and the flash bulbs are going off, but there's Joe Piscopo and he's really friendly. And I came with Tim. Standing on the stairs is Chris Pine. There's Whoopi Goldberg goes up the stairs. Meryl Streep goes in here. I go to the bathroom. Kevin Costner is coming out. Steve Guttenberg is standing there. I go into the bathroom. There's Keith Richards. I mean, it was just mind-blowing overkill. It's like, oh my, how do I tell this story? And you can't ask Keith Richards, hey, what you doing? In the men's room, or can we do a selfie? So it's just this little private affair with this glitterati that will blow your mind. And then if you saw the show, it was a gigantic production. To me, seeing the B-52s and to see Devo, New Kids on the Block were a huge hit. Cher, it was really, really exciting. But then Sunday was the same overkill of celebrities. I'm next to Anthony Michael Hall, and Siobhan Fallon's not a huge name, but still a really great ex-Saturday Night Liver who's done a lot of movies. Melanie Hutzel is here, Tim is here, Belushi's over here, all the new cast is back here. I mean, it was just an amazing collection of people. Paul McCartney's right there. And I'll tell you this story. So the show's just about over, and Melanie and Siobhan and I are looking at each other going, are we going up on stage? Are they going to invite us on stage? Well, I wore a red tie at a black tie event for one reason, because I thought, well, my family, my wife will be able to find me in the crowd. So I put on a red tie, with that in mind. But I get down to the stage and there's Marty center stage, and Marty's an old friend. I go, hey, Marty, how you doing? So I'm talking to him for a second. There's Brad Hall in the audience. Brad, come on up here. You need to be up here. Suddenly the red light comes on. There's Paul McCartney. There's Marty, and Lorne Michaels comes in. I realize I am center stage. Well, I wasn't going to move at that point. There was no way I was going to move. Finally, my family gets to see that, I was actually here. And so I stay there. I
I can
go to
tell
the
you as
party.
a fan watching, I screamed. I was like, yes, there
You
we
you
go.
you
There we
share
go.
that, and I was so close to Paul McCartney I could smell his bath soap. But I didn't think anything of it. I went to the party and my phone is blowing up. Kroeger, you were next to Paul McCartney. We saw you. Screenshots, screenshots. I wake up the next day. The front of the New York Times is a shot of Lorne, me, Paul, and Marty. It's all over the place. And so it was an unexpected um, Valentine, you know.
So I know you're a huge Beatles fan.
I
Well, you
am.
were on the show. Ringo Starr hosted, so you got to actually spend a week with him.
Yeah.
Now you're standing next to Paul McCartney. I believe you've met Paul McCartney also in the past.
Yeah, 10 years earlier.
Have you met George before?
No,
Okay.
no, never had.
So
And I
what?
never met John. So I met two of four, which for a Beatlemaniac, since he was 6 years old, I never expected to meet any. So 500, that's okay.
That's all right. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Before we wrap up, are there any cast members that came after you that you wish you would have had a chance to
Phil Hartman, Phil
sandblast
Hartman,
with?
Phil Hartman, Phil Hartman, Phil Hartman. Chris Farley, Will Ferrell, um, um, Tina Fey, absolutely. Really, I find the new cast phenomenal. Um, Kate McKinnon, I think, is just comedy gold, everything she touches. I would have liked to have worked with any of them, but I said Phil Hartman over and over because I had a chance to see Phil before he was killed. And I said, hey, Phil, you had the career I wish that I could have had. I said, I admire you so much. I wanted to be you on that show. Thank you, Gary. That's very nice of you to say. But yeah, he was the man.
Awesome. Well, it's so awesome talking to you, folks. You have a podcast, right? Let's plug your podcast.
The Gary and Kenny Show. We're doing a new one tomorrow. We had Joe Piscopo on the last one. We'll do a post Saturday Night Live tomorrow. The Gary and Kenny Show. I have a blog. Nobody blogs, but I do. It's political, so prepare yourself. Gary has issues, which is easy to remember. Gary has issues.
This is Gary Kroeger, folks. Gary, thanks so much for chatting with us today on Cherry the Geek TV.